So basically 3 questions. First, what is life cycle thinking and what is life cycle assessment? I don't like that. Whatever. Then what is greenwashing? And then it will become very obvious why the two are connected. So I'll just start by an example. First, maybe some of you have heard about the Zen car. Zen stands for zero emission and no noise because it is a purely electric car. Just plug it in and you're good to go. And according to the marketing material, if you drive a Zen car, you will eliminate up to 6 tons of CO2 emissions every year. The thing is that there's something misleading about that claim. It is true that if you look only at the electric car, you will get zero emission because it's only electric. But if you zoom out a little bit and you ask yourself, where does the electricity come from? And you forget you're in Quebec province where you have 96% of hydropower, it's most likely going to involve some form of combustion and coal power plant. So because you have charged your car, the coal power plant is going to produce more emissions. So if you look at the whole system, the emissions are definitively non-zero. And in life cycle assessment, we call that the consequence displacement over space. You just shove the impact somewhere else. Another example is we used to have a very old fridge that contains CFC, and those we know are bad for the ozone layer. And since 1987, they have been progressively replaced by HCFCs, so we have modern fridge who do not damage the ozone layer. But the problem is that HCFCs are 10,000 times more powerful as greenhouse gas than CO2. So we just switched problem. We used to have the ozone layer problem, now we have a worse global warming problem. And we call that consequence displacement over type of impact. So just by those 2 examples, you can learn a lot of things. First is that supply chains and environments sometimes interact in a way that is kind of unexpected or hidden. And also, if you want to make sound environmental decisions, you really have to have a big picture approach. And that's exactly what life cycle thinking is. It's just a very small set of principles, really easy to follow. And life cycle assessment is the methodology that allows you to quantify, to put numbers on impacts. So, one of those principles is that you should take into account all types of impacts, not only global warming, but we quantify acidification, eutrophisation, ozone layer depletion, use of renewable and non-renewable resources, toxic effects on plants, biodiversity, etc., all of it. Also, we look at the whole life cycle, the whole supply chain. The catchphrase is from cradle to grave. So you start with raw material extraction, and you go transformation, transportation, energy production, use phase, and end of life. So when you start doing life cycle assessment, you learn a lot of things. The 2 most important for me is that there's always some kind of hotspots in the life cycle of something. So it might be transportation, or it might be the use phase that will have more impact, but there's always something like a Pareto effect. You have 80% of the impacts that come from about 20% of the operations in the life cycle. And also there's the infamous it depends. For example, the electric car might be a good idea in Quebec because we have so much clean energy, but because it is good in Quebec, it's not necessarily be good elsewhere. So depending on the context, it always depends. Now we're going to move on to greenwashing. According to a very entertaining document by Tra Choice, greenwashing is the act of misleading consumers regarding the environmental practices of a company or the environmental benefits of a product and a service. And how does it work? It's always the same thing. It's variation over the same idea. Is that it will only present you a partial picture or a vague picture. It will present you irrelevant information, or it will present you things that are blown out of proportion. And the good thing when you know life cycle assessment is that any of those tactics are not going to resist life cycle assessment, because we look at the big picture, we look at in very detail what happens in all the branches of the supply chain. So greenwashing is not going to win against that. So Because I told you earlier, it always depends. There's no straight answer to every environmental question. I will give you some examples, but I would like you to remember what are the principles behind the examples. And I can only tell you what kind of question you have to ask yourself when you're in front of an environmental claim. First is, what is the hotspot of the product? And I have an example that does not respect that here. I bumped on those Nestle Pure Life water, and they claim that they have made the plastic cap smaller. And we don't really care about that because what is the hotspot in a bottle of water is transportation. So even if you use less raw material to do it, the bottle is still as heavy as it used to be because the water in it is the same weight. So if you want less environmental impacts with your bottle of water, you should buy local water instead of water that comes from Fiji Island. Then sometimes you hear the debate against local versus bio. So this is not a general idea, it's only specific to this corn example, but the production of the corn has much more impact than the transportation of it for this specific study. So if you want to buy local, you're only going to, is there a point to it? So you're only going to affect this little portion of the impacts here. But if you change the way it is produced by buying bio, you will affect that big chunk of impact. So for this specific example, it might be better to go bio instead of local. Then you can also ask yourself, when they are in the claim, are they talking only about one type of impact? If it's the case, they are maybe trying to hide the consequence displacement for type of impact. If they're not talking about the full life cycle, they might be trying to hide some kind of displacement over a space. And I have another example that might surprise you. So if you are buying that type of corn, you can buy it either with packaging or without packaging. And you think that, okay, more packaging means more impact. And that's only when you consider a small portion of the supply chain. If you look at the whole supply chain, there's something surprising that happens, is that when you wrap it a little bit, there's less loss. So if there's less loss, it means that less of them have been produced for nothing, and it means less environmental impacts. For this specific example, a little bit of packaging is better than no packaging at all. So, but I will agree with you, there is such a thing as over-packaging. So just to wrap it up, I want to say that my message is not that you should buy bio instead of local, that electric cars are bad or good, or that packaging is good, bad, or necessary. I would just like you to remember the principles because they point towards very relevant questions that you should ask yourself. Unfortunately, you have to make your own homework because there's no definite answer to all those questions. You have to dig yourself because you can't really trust some marketing material to give you the whole truth. So you should always be skeptical because it is often based on a distortion or not the full story. And the problems are yeah, I already said that. And so there's no clear-cut answer. You have different indicators, and one product might be better in certain indicators and worse on others. So I just want to give you the last word is that the only green product is the one you don't buy. Thank you.